Imagine a game where every detail of daily life is painstakingly recreated. A game where you can wander through vibrant living neighborhoods, talk to dozens of characters, and experience a story that unfolds over days with real time weather and a day and night cycle. This was the promise of Shenmue, one of the most ambitious games ever developed. Released for the Sega Dreamcast in 1999, Shenmue revolutionized open world design, setting the stage for the genre as we know it today. Today, we're going to be diving into the creation, impact, and the legacy of Shenmue, the game that forever changed how we experience virtual worlds. So grab your notebook, get ready for some martial arts, and join us for today's trip down memory card lane. Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening. I hope these words find you well. Hello, and welcome to the 219th episode of our video game history podcast, A Trip Down Memory Card Lane. Each week, we'll tell you a story relevant to the current week in gaming history. It can be about a game or the people that created it. It can be about a console or the technology that brought it to life. We often talk about the companies that bring it all together, making our hobby, video games, a reality. While telling you each story, we hope to teach you something new about the topic, what it took from the world as its inspiration, or what it gave back to the world and its legacy. Today, we're diving into the groundbreaking world of Shenmue, first released on December 29th, 1999 for the Sega Dreamcast, just in time for the new millennium. I'm David Casson, and as always, I'm joined by my co-host who definitely could spend hours getting lost in a virtual city and not even realize it. He's my brother, Rob Casson. So, Rob, if you could explore any virtual world in real life, what would it be? What's at the top of your list?
Oh man, that's a tough one. Um, wow, there are so many worlds that would be interesting.
I know.
Hmm.
Any gut reactions? I know that's a deep topic, but is there any like gut reaction that you're like, this would be cool, but because I immediately thought of like, um, oh man, and now I can't even think of the series name. Alloy, the girl with the red hair, fights the motorized dragons, robot thingies on the
Hmm?
PlayStation. Horizon Zero Dawn.
Mm.
I think that world is freaking awesome. Dangerous, but freaking awesome. Would I survive in it? Hell no. I would get murdered by a robot animal like there was nobody's tomorrow. But I think
Honestly,
it'd be very
yeah, my gut reaction was Ark,
Arc would be cool.
but yeah, same thing. I ain't surviving that.
What about the Pokemon? I thought about Pokemon too for you.
That would be a good one too. Yeah. I don't know why that wasn't first. I think just Ark was always just beautiful landscapes and stuff, and
Arc
Pokemon's
is,
cool to have Pokemon creatures and stuff. But like,
yeah.
I mean, I guess I didn't watch enough of the anime to know how beautiful the world can be, but I don't know. Just Ark was the gut reaction, but Pokemon's a solid second.
Yeah, for sure. Well, I we have a lot to talk about with our topic today, Shenmue. So before I get into everything, why don't you tell our listeners what else has happened during this week in gaming history?
Well, kicking it off on the subject of Pokemon, on November 8th, 1995, Creatures Inc. was founded in Japan, known primarily for its role in developing and managing aspects of the Pokemon franchise. As a subsidiary of the Pokemon Company, Creatures Inc. contributed to the creation of the Pokemon TCG and the development of various Pokemon titles. The company also played a key role in designing and modeling Pokemon for the video games. Over the years, Creatures Inc. has become an integral part of the Pokemon's franchise's success, contributing to its worldwide appeal and enduring popularity across multiple forms of media. We looked at Creatures Inc. as part of our episode on the origins of the Pokemon series, which was back in episode 57, so go give that a listen if you want to learn more.
That was a long time ago.
It sure was, Dave.
That was a good episode though.
It sure was. Pikachu Plain.
Pikachu playing. I don't. We always love that episode, and it's funny because like it's really early on in our repertoire. I feel like that's the time period when we were really just starting to get the history like part under our feet, and that was a solid addition to our to history. So
Indeed, it was. And speaking of solid history, on November 9th, 2000, Counter Strike was officially released for Microsoft Windows, developed by Valve and published by Sierra Studios. Originally a mod for Half Life, Counter Strike quickly grew into one of the most influential multiplayer first person shooters, pioneering the tactical team based shooter genre. Players could choose to play as either terrorists or counter terrorists, engaging in objective based gameplay that emphasized strategy, teamwork, and precise gunplay. The game's competitive nature and its deep skill based mechanics made it a staple in the world of esports, where it continues to thrive to this day. We also explored the legacy and impact of Counter Strike in detail back in episode 115 of our podcast, so be sure to check that out for a deeper dive into this groundbreaking game.
very, very true. I spent my time on Counter Strike, that's for sure.
Yeah, I have played it a time or two.
I hate to think how much time, like you know, back when the games didn't really, they didn't tell you how much time you spent in them. It'd be interesting. I often think like how many hours did I put into specific games? It'd be interesting to find out.
You might be sad to see it though.
I would probably be very sad to see it. Yeah, you're right. You're right.
Next up, on November 3rd, 2005, Pandemic Studios and BioWare announced the formation of a strategic alliance, creating the BioWare Pandemic Studios partnership. This alliance, facilitated by private equity firm Elevation Partners, brought together two prominent studios known for their work in different genres. BioWare for role playing games like Baldur's Gate and Star Wars Knights of the Old Republic, and Pandemic for action titles like Star Wars Battlefront and Mercenaries. The partnership aimed to combine the creative and technical strengths of both studios while allowing them to maintain operational independence. This alliance was seen as a major move in the gaming industry at the time, highlighting the increasing importance of collaboration and consolidation among top developers. And this partnership lasted until 2009, when both studios were acquired by Electronic Arts. Next up, on November 6, 2007, Mario and Sonic at the Olympic Games were released for the Wii, developed by Sega and published by Nintendo. This was the first crossover game featuring characters from both Mario and Sonic the Hedgehog franchises, with iconic characters competing in a variety of Olympic themed events. The game allowed players to participate in events like track and field, swimming, and gymnastics using the Wii's motion controls. Mario and Sonic at the Olympic Games was praised for its multiplayer fun and the novelty of seeing these two gaming mascots together for the first time. We also discussed this back in episode 205, which covered the history on video games related to the Olympics.
We sure did. That was a good episode too.
Indeed, it was.
We learned about the history of the Olympics as well.
Yeah, that old stuff that Dave really loves to teach.
Yes, indeed. That is so true. You're right.
Uh, Last up for this week in gaming history, one of my favorite RTS games. On November 4th, 2008, Tom Clancy's War was released for PS3, Xbox 360, and Microsoft Windows. Developed by Ubisoft Shanghai and published by Ubisoft. This RTS game stood out for its innovative voice command system, which allowed players to control units on the battlefield using spoken commands, a feature that was highly praised for its intuitive integration. Set in the near future World War III scenario, War focused on large scale battles between the US, European Union, and Russia, with players taking command of one of these factions to achieve global dominance. Although the game received positive feedback for its voice command system and tactical depth, it was criticized for a lack of variety and depth in its campaign. Nevertheless, Tom Clancy's War offered a fresh take on the RTS genre, particularly on consoles, where those types of games were less common.
You love that game.
I really did. I thought that the voice command system was fantastic. And, it was, I thought it was a really well played game. I do agree that there wasn't a whole lot of variety in the campaign, but it was still a fantastic game to play. And, just being, the voice command was honestly the big selling point, like it says. Just, that was so cool to just be like a true commander, be like, hey, this squad needs to go here, do this, attack this person, secure this point. Like, that was just so cool.
I wonder if there's a place for that today, like an improved version, because every facet graphics and voice recognition and library of commands and like everything is just exponentially more than it was back when.
I mean, I if there were, I would jump on it 100%. That would be dope.
Nice. Very nice.
But that's it for this week's game, this week in gaming history, Dave. So why don't you take it off and talk about today's subject?
So today, Rob, we are revisiting the career of Yu Suzuki, who we last learned about in episode 204, which was back in July. And that episode was on Sega's kind of first blockbuster arcade cabinet, Afterburner, the air combat simulator that you could, hop into the cockpit and fly around in. Now, there are many interesting things that we learned about Yu Suzuki, but I wanted to take a moment and talk about his introduction to programming because we got a good giggle out of it last time. When Suzuki entered junior high, he began to become fond of professions with English names because he thought they sounded really cool. And the career of a programmer appealed to him because he imagined it came from the prefix pro, which was professional, and the word glamour, which in Japanese can have the meaning of voluptuous. And so the word programmer conjured up the image of a curvy lady to Suzuki.
Nice.
I mean, that's as good of a reason to develop an interest in programming as any, isn't it?
100% it is.
It was funny. Luckily, he stuck with it. Surely, much worse things have happened due to voluptuous women. Like the Trojan War. Well, the Trojan War is mythological, but I'm sure that at some point in history, someone has fought some war over a woman.
Well, durr.
Yeah, that's all I'm saying. So, be thankful. In Suzuki's case, his interest in programming never left, thankfully, and he followed it into a career in which he was literally considered to be at the cutting edge of technology when it came to the Japanese video game industry. Suzuki pretty much invented motion simulator arcade cabinets, a genre that really still remains popular today. He started with Hang On, the motorcycle racing cabinet. His early career spans many years, also includes Space Harrier, Outrun, and of course the topic of episode 204, which was Afterburner. And as part of that story, we learned that the development of Afterburner occurred kind of just as Sega was adopting a flex time work schedule, meaning that employees were free to make their own schedule and work away from the office. The team working on Afterburner would become known as Studio 128 due to the fact that at the time, Afterburner was known as Project 128. So right after the team finishes Afterburner, right after the team finishes Afterburner, which was successful, they develop a kart racing game called Power Drift. And it was kind of during the development process and shortly thereafter the release of Power Drift that Sega as a company began to make some changes to the organization of its video game development division. Up until this time, all of their development was conducted under a single department. It was called the amusement machine division. And at that point, they divided up that division. In the past, we've talked a lot about early Nintendo titles, for instance. And if you recall, they split themselves up into different research and development divisions, R&D 1 through R&D 4. And this is exactly the same stance that Sega took here in the late 80s as they became more serious about video game development. They wanted to have different teams focusing on different endeavors. So Studio 128 became Sega AM2, or Amusement Machine Research and Development 2. Boy, that's a mouthful.
Indeed, it is.
Anyway, Sega AM2 was formed, and Yu Suzuki was promoted to general manager of the AM2 division. Their first project was the 1992 Formula One racing game Virtua Racing. Now, Virtua Racing helped popularize 3D polygon graphics at a time in which the video game industry was just starting to transition from 2D to 3D. And for this reason, it often has a place when discussing some of the more influential titles in video game history. Its success pretty much laid the foundation for the future of 3D racing games. And also, with the success of virtual racing, the team of Sega AM2 gained expertise, and they then split into two separate teams that would work on two even more influential titles, so to speak. One team took everything that they learned about 3D polygon graphics and they used it to develop the very first arcade fighting game to feature full 3D polygon graphics, which was called Virtua Fighter. In the same way that virtual racing laid the foundation for subsequent 3D racing games, we consider Virtua Fighter to feature full 3D polygon graphics and be the grandfather of the 3D fighting genre, so to speak. In fact, it has become an entire series in which almost every subsequent version has helped push graphics and other technical aspects of the fighting genre forward, all the way up until Virtual Fighter 5, which came out a few years ago in 2021. Now, the other team that came out of AM2 took that 3D expertise and they use it to push 3D graphics to yet another new height with the release of the arcade racing cabinet Daytona USA. Excellent game. I think I still play that when I go to the arcades.
Oh, absolutely. It is still to this day fantastic.
I mean, it's 20 plus years old and for whatever reason, it holds up swimmingly and I love it.
No, I agree. Every time we go, we do play it.
I think a lot of the reason is because it didn't try to be real, right? It's an arcade racing cabinet, like not simulation racing cabinet. It's literally arcade. And I think because of that, like it's timeless. Like the graphics are decent, the driving's decent. It doesn't try to be anything that it's not. So I don't think that one's really going to go out of style until we jack into our brains directly.
True, I agree.
So Daytona USA brought texture mapping to the 3D realm, and it introduced new audiences to essentially the future of 3D graphics. You know, in Virtual Fighter and Virtual Racing, we basically had like just polygons, like untextured. They were colored, but they were just polygons. But Daytona USA brought texture mapping. So suddenly, you didn't just have 3D shapes, you had a car with decals on it and a racetrack with the lines on it, and you had the advertisements on the wall. Like suddenly we were in 3D and it was starting to look more like the world as we know it. It was incredibly successful, and Daytona USA is also frequently cited as one of the best video games of all time. As we said, timeless. Somewhere along the way, Suzuki decided that he wanted to work on a project that would provide a longer experience for gamers. Instead of the few minutes long playthrough that arcade games were designed for, he yearned to make a game that would captivate gamers for hours. And so he began to research role playing games. In order to lay down the framework to create this type of game, which admittedly Suzuki and the Sega AM2 team really wasn't familiar with, they built a prototype Sega Saturn game called The Old Man and the Peach Tree.
Oh,
Designed to test camera, combat, and conversation systems, The Old Man and the Peach Tree told the story of a young man, Taro, who is seeking a martial arts grandmaster in 1950s China. Taro brings an old man a peach in exchange for information about the Grandmaster. At the end of the game, the man skillfully skips stones across the water to hunt fish, revealing that he is indeed the Grandmaster. Sorry to break it to you. I don't even know if you can play this. It's a prototype, so.
oh well.
I mean, let's be honest. Nothing that they had done before was going to be even at that scope, right? Because their whole library up until then was air combat games, racing games. I'm sure there were a few others, but it was all arcade cabinets. It was all literally games just designed to get you to lose as soon as possible and put money after money after money into there, right?
Yeah, absolutely, it was.
Yeah. I mean that's realistically that I mean that's realistically it. I mean they only made short experiences and now it was time to do something different. In 1996, the team used the Old Man and the Peach as the groundwork, as the prototype, as they used that prototype as the basis, rather, to start building out a full 3D RPG that was planned to have, among other things, recorded voice acting, a cinematic approach to scenes, so like cut scenes that would tell a story, and they wanted to support combat that had multiple characters. They were going to utilize some previous work. They wanted to utilize the animations and the combat engine from Virtua Fighter. And it was even initially going to star Akira, who is one of the characters from Virtua Fighter, with the intention of tying the two games together. At this point, it was designated to be a 3D Sega Saturn title with the working title Guppy. I don't know why Guppy. No clue.
Well,
Nothing
that
about
answers my question.
nothing about Virtual Fighter or Akira or anything really screams Guppy. Small fish in a big pond. Maybe that's why Guppy. That's the only thing I can come up with.
Yeah, no clue.
Suzuki traveled to China to do some research. He wanted to gain inspiration for the game's setting. He wanted to learn more about various martial arts. And so he went to China. And during that trip, his vision of the game began to change. And he decided then and there that he needed to dramatically change the story. He sat down and he wrote a 4-act plot for Guppy. Each plot had a theme, and the themes were sadness, fight, departure, and starting afresh. With that framework in mind, Akira was going to face the death of his father, then overcome his grief and travel to China. Akira would then have to battle with another character. He would emerge victorious, then leave on a new journey. Even from the get go, Suzuki thought of this as a multi part epic. So, with that framework in mind, he brought in screenwriter, a playwright, movie directors. He brought in all sorts of kinds of writers for what he called borderless development. He described it as a multi level way of writing the script that would focus on the story instead of focusing on the gameplay like most of the development he was used to. Now, we've seen that before, right? There's two ways to develop a game. Either the gameplay tells the story or the story tells the gameplay. And arcade games cabinets are almost always written in a way that the gameplay tells the story, and now they had to flip flop and try something new. So,
But did it pay off?
but did it pay off? That's the question. Well, together they wrote 11 chapters for the game, him and his gaggle of writers. They created 11 corresponding illustrations for what was slated to be called Virtual Fighter RPG Akira's Story. In 1997, Suzuki decided to move development over to Sega's upcoming console, the Sega Dreamcast. He wanted it to be the killer app for the Dreamcast. In his mind, it would be a console title with no limitations. And so he had it all planned out. He aimed for 5 hours of movie scenes, 4 hours of multi opponent battles with open areas to use and explore, 4 hours of searching for items, 8 hours of exploration and conversation, 4 hours spent studying and training on martial arts, 4 hours in dungeons, and another 4 hours traveling between areas. He had the whole thing down to a science. And the end result was slated to be a 45-hour role playing game that people could play, as he put it, for long periods of time without getting tired. Because it was going to be the centerpiece for a new console, the decision was made at that point to break ties with the old. So the Virtual Fighter tie in was dropped, and he announced it under the working title Project Berkeley. And frankly, at that point, the hype train just kind of left the station at full speed. It was a Suzuki title, and Suzuki was known for making great games. Now, not really known for making anything like this, but he hadn't really failed yet because everything that he had made was immensely successful. He was the man at Sega, and he could do no wrong. So people were frankly hyped for what he was going to produce, right?
Right.
So, November of 1998, Sega announces that Project Berkeley, one of their standout titles for the upcoming Sega Dreamcast, is so unique of a gaming experience that they've had to coin a new genre in order to describe it. That genre's name is Free, Free, which stands for Full Reactive Eyes Entertainment. Frankly, they give no further explanation as to what that means. Also, it's never really ever heard of again.
All right, fair enough.
So at that point, the team at AM2 was focused on creating a massive game world that was modeled on Yokosuka, Japan, a specific neighborhood in Yokosuka, Japan called Dubita. Suzuki brought in literally interior decorators who helped design more than 1,200 rooms and locations. Now, I know that probably doesn't sound like a lot by today's, numbers, but in 1999 it was unheard of. They modeled over 300 characters with their own names, personalities, and relationships, some of which are actually modeled on Sega employees. They actually pulled meteorological records from 1986 to create an algorithm that generated weather as well as proper day and night cycles. Heading into 1999, the team was focused on fixing bugs. But at the time, there were no modern bug tracking systems, so they had to use an Excel spreadsheet to keep tabs on everything. At one point, there were over 10,000 unresolved bugs just due to the sheer scale of this game. It's a huge game.
Say 10,000?
Over 10,000.
That's a lot of bugs.
That's a lot of bugs, for sure. That's a lot of bugs. A few of my favorites that I found in various reviews and interviews and conversation. One, thanks to the animation team sharing skeletons and animations amongst one another to speed up development, there was for a brief time a cat that walked on two legs.
Hell yeah. That's a cool cat.
One day, this one's fantastic, honestly. One day, someone reported that all of the people in the warehouse district, a specific district, were gone and were nowhere to be found. So all the NPCs in this area gone. No one had any clue what was going on.
They pulled a free guy.
Yeah, right? They were all tracked down to a convenience store where all the NPCs were programmed to buy breakfast in the morning. And it ended up being so many at once that it caused severe congestion in a doorway to such an extreme that they all got stuck and couldn't go anywhere.
Wow.
In the end, honestly, this is part of the fun part of the story. They came up with a really simple solution to resolve the bug. They just widened the doorway.
Yeah, that works. Why
It
not?
did. It totally did. It fixed it. Absolutely fixed it. I think that's fantastic. Oh my god. That's a doozy of a bug too. Like to be playing a game and suddenly find all of your NPCs are just gone. Like just gone.
Yeah, that is pretty something.
I'm glad that they were somewhere. That's fascinating. So it's 1999. The game is slated to come out at the end of the year, and the team's working on bugs and the finishing touches. So it was time to start localizing the game for English audiences, and frankly, the localization was just said to be an absolute disaster. Suzuki insisted that they record the English voices in Japan, so it's said that they hired pretty much every English speaker in Japan that called themselves a voice actor. And on top of that, the scripts were translated by several people because it was such a huge game. They didn't have time. So they were inconsistent, and there was no time for direction, no time for someone to review it, no time for rewrites. It was literally like a one and done as fast as they could to get it localized. By the end of its development, Shenmue was the most expensive game developed at the time, reportedly costing Sega $70 million. And if I'm not mistaken, I looked it up, but I looked it up early in my research. I believe it held that record until like 2008 with Grand Theft Auto 4, if I'm thinking right. So
Are you thinking right though, Dave?
I don't know. It held it for a while. On December 29th, 1999, Shenmue was released in Japan, and after years of development, gamers were finally able to explore 1980s Japan. You know, Rob, as we explore the detailed and immersive world of Shenmue, it makes me think about how easy it is these days to create your own world, or at least your own podcast.
Yeah, Shenmue was really ahead of its time, but starting a podcast still sounds like a big undertaking. So, where would I even begin?
Well, that's where Zencaster comes in. Zencaster is an all in one podcasting platform that makes it incredibly easy to record high quality audio and video all from your web browser. No need for complicated setups or expensive equipment. Just log in and you're ready to start recording.
Wait, so I can record a podcast with professional audio and 4K video, all without needing a ton of gear or technical know how?
Exactly. And Zencaster's post production tools make you sound like a pro, too. It automatically removes background noise, levels your audio, cleans up awkward silences and filler words, just makes it sound real nice and smooth.
Well, that sounds easier than mastering martial arts. But once I've recorded, how do I get my podcast out there?
Zencaster takes care of that, too. You can distribute your podcast to all the major platforms like Spotify, Apple Podcasts, and more directly from their platform. It's never been easier to get your voice heard.
Well, it sounds like it's time to start my podcast about open world games. So, how can our listeners get started?
It's easy. Just head over to zencaster.com/forward slash pricing and use our offer code, all one word, memory card lane. You'll get 30% off the first month of any Zencaster paid plan. Whether you're starting your very first podcast or looking to upgrade your current setup, Zencaster has everything you need.
Well, with how simple Zencaster makes it, I think I'll finally create that podcast I've been dreaming about.
And for all of our listeners, if you want to create that podcast you've been dreaming about, now is the perfect time to jump in and start your own podcast. Again, head to zencaster.com/forward slash pricing and use our offer code, all one word, memory card lane, and you can get 30% off your first month. Start sharing your stories with the world today.
All right, well, let's get back to unraveling the mysteries of Shenmue.
Yeah, Shenmue.
Woo!
Woo! So, upon its release, Shenmue was critically hailed as a revolutionary gaming experience. If you look at its aggregate rating on game rankings, which pulls it all together, it holds about an 89%, which is, I mean, yeah, there are lots of games that beat it, but an 89% is no slouch by any stretch of the imagination. It inevitably sold 1.2 million copies worldwide. But with the cost of development as high as it was, every single Dreamcast owner on the face of the earth would have had to buy it twice for Sega to have even turned a profit on the game whatsoever. So, I mean, that wasn't going to happen, you know?
Yeah, probably not.
It's not a game for everyone by any stretch of the imagination. It's not a game for everyone. Um, it is an open world game, and we recently talked about Grand Theft Auto 3 open world and how revolutionary Grand Theft Auto 3 was, correct?
Correct.
How it was an open world, and it was one of the first, like, I remember it being one of the first times that I remember just opening up a game for the sake of walking around a city and doing things. Um, but it was, whereas Grand Theft Auto is a city that is built on aggression and violence. I think that's a fair statement. When you
Yeah, no, I'd say that's fair.
Shenmue is literally a game that's built on an everyday experience. Like you are in a village, you can get a job, you can talk to people about their day. It's not it's not a city in the same way that Grand Theft Auto was, but it is a real city. Shops open and close. They have a schedule. Buses are on. There's public transportation that runs on a timetable. All the NPCs have daily routines. You get a daily allowance. Like I said, you have a job that you can buy things at. Some of the things you can do, you can drive forklifts, you can gamble, you can arm wrestle, go fishing, do street fighting. There are different things that you can do to earn money. Like it is a like real breathing town, just not one that's built on violence. It's Shenmue itself is all about a character who's trying to find his dad's murderer. So it's more about the mystery of that than it is about murdering everyone, so to speak.
Speak for yourself.
But you have two types of people who approach Shenmue. You have people who are, in all honesty, me included, that are in the Grand Theft Auto field, right? That need the action, that need the excitement, right? And then you have the people who love games like this, who love the detail, who love the mundane details because they get to exist in a world that they would never exist in whatsoever. And even if it's real, like it's not their reality. Does that make sense?
Oh, absolutely, it does.
Um, so there are a lot of things for it. So it was really love or hate with that game. There was no way they were going to sell enough to ever turn a profit. But to be fair to the situation, Suzuki and the team, right from the get go, they knew that it was going to be a multi game like epic story, and they spent some of that money developing the first title to also develop part of the second game. Literally, they built part of the second game while they were working on the first one. So anytime someone really brings up the cost of Shenmue, someone else is really quick to go, but wait, some of that was spent on Shenmue too. So take that for what you will. They built the second game out. Critically, it actually rates better. The Dreamcast version, at least, rates better than the first one. It said that pretty much everything that people criticized about the first game, they improved on it for the second game. So that was fun. It was released in Japan on the Dreamcast on September 6th, 2001. Wow, that's very close. However, stateside, Microsoft bought exclusivity for Shenmue 2. So Shenmue 2 was released over here for the original Xbox in October of 2002. It never came to the Dreamcast over here.
Lame.
We don't know Xbox sales, but we know that the Dreamcast version only sold about 100,000 copies. Literally a tenth, not even a tenth of what they sold for the first game. And while reviews for the Dreamcast version were more positive than the original, it actually sits at an aggregate of 90, not much better, but better nonetheless. Reviews for the Xbox game version were not very favorable. It frankly just couldn't stand up next to some of the other Xbox games like Grand Theft Auto, for instance. And I think as a result, the Xbox reviews were much less positive. And then, kind of not surprisingly at all, Rob, after such a poor showing, two games that were commercially unsuccessful, there was nothing for a long, long time.
But then,
Shenmue was popular. It had a cult following. It just didn't have a successful commercial following. Suzuki continued to produce games as head of AM2 up until about 2008. In 2008, he stepped down as general manager. And for a short while, he was kind of elsewhere at Sega, helming, being the leader of a bunch of canceled projects. There was a touchscreen fighting game, I think it was called Psyops or something like that, that tested poorly and was canceled. And then Sega attempted to break into the Asian MMO markets by creating a game called Shenmue Online, but frankly, it was doomed before it got anywhere. the company they partnered with pulled out, and then it just kind of languished in development hell, and was eventually just quietly never talked about ever again and never released. Somewhere in 2008 or 2009, he stepped down in Sega from like a producer capacity into a consultant capacity. And he started his own studio called EaseNet. In 2010, they developed a mobile phone game that was designed to reintroduce gamers to this series, and it was called Shenmue City. Then in 2015, he announced a Kickstarter to raise money to make, you guessed it, Shenmue 3.
Woo, 3.
It ultimately raised $6.33 million. It was the fastest game to ever reach the $1 million mark on the Kickstarter platform. Kind of capitalizing on its inevitable release, Sega ended up releasing high definition ports of Shenmue 1 and 2 for the PS4, Windows, and Xbox One in 2018. So, if you're interested in playing Shenmue 1 or Shenmue 2, that's how you can do it. They definitely updated the graphics. They fixed some things in it. It gets a little bit of criticism because some of the clunkiness of the original game is still in the ports. It wasn't a remake, it was a port with some limited fixes in it. So that does exist. Rob, in your case, we could get it probably, I'm guessing, Steam. I know that Shenmue 3 was an Epic exclusive for its first year, but I think it's everywhere now. Um, and speaking of Shenmue 3, that was released the following year in 2019, and it exists for PlayStation 4 and Windows. Reception to Shenmue 3 was lukewarm at best. It's sitting at like a 68, 69, 70% average score online. And frankly, sales just weren't great whatsoever. With that being said, copies sold to Kickstarter backers, they don't count towards overall sales. So, to be fair to the situation, they did sell $6.3 million before they started counting sales. But realistically, after that, I think they sold a couple 100,000 copies and it didn't amount to much of anything. To this day, Shenmue remains a cult classic, right? It's a niche product that really appeals to a core group of people. Like I said, one of the things that people did like about Shenmue 3 was that it was very faithful to the series, to 1 and 2, meaning that again, it's a normal neighborhood where people go about their daily lives. It's not the Grand Theft Auto where, there's cops and robbers and stuff like that. So it's a very different vibe. And just to kind of give you an idea of what that's like, aside from what I have to say about it, I want to share with you this quote. It's by Brendan Main. He wrote it in The Escapist in December of 2010. He said, if the Grand Theft Auto games have been vilified as a crime simulator in which you can press a button to buy a hooker, then run a hooker over with a car, accurate. Shenmue is a game where you can press a button to politely ask directions, then combo into cherishing your elders and always remembering to recycle.
Very different game there.
Very different vibe. Instead of giving us a city to be tested and battered against in all directions, Shenmue builds you a world and asks you to follow the rules rather than break them. So, to be fair to Shenmue's legacy, we have it to thank for bringing different technological aspects of gaming to the mainstream. For instance, love it or hate it, Shenmue coined the term quick time event and popularized it in the same vein. So that's where we get QTEs from. And in all honesty, it predates Grand Theft Auto 3, which we just covered a few weeks ago. And so, it's technically it is the first, our earliest open world city game of this kind. Just Grand Theft Auto was the more popular one, and in a lot of ways technically the better one, and so it did more in terms of bringing that to the masses, which then disseminated through the genre. But this game definitely helped lay the groundwork. I mean, they're both open world city games, and again, it predates Grand Theft Auto 3 by a little bit. And I think it was really ahead of its time with its ambitious storytelling that spanned multiple titles and its style, frankly. I think that there's definitely a place for city simulations nowadays, simulations that aren't as aggressive as Grand Theft Auto, but when they made it back in 1999 for such a limited player base as the Dreamcast, that simply didn't exist for them back then. Does that make sense?
Yeah, I think it does.
I mean, think of all the simulation games we have nowadays that aren't aggressive games that you batter against. I mean, you love Farming Simulator. There's nothing, about that involves beating your head up against something or murdering a hooker, you know?
I mean, that's all. That's what you think. You've never played
Oh,
it.
so you do beat your head against things in Farming Simulator.
Guess you'll just have to play and find out, won't you?
I think and Shenmue 3 probably proves me wrong because Shenmue 3 came out and no one bought it. But I do think if you introduce it as a new series, like people would the scope of it would be appealing. The storytelling would be appealing. And there's lots of people, more casual gamers, who just want a Zen game. I love Stardew Valley. I play Stardew Valley all the time when I just want to sit down and not think about anything. And I think a game like this appeals to that same mentality, to be honest with you.
I mean, that's totally fair.
That's totally fair. All right, Rob. Well, that'll pretty much do it for Shenmue. Uh, you know, Sega AM2 still exists, and well, kinda. Yu Suzuki still has a career. EaseNet still makes things. Nothing in this series, obviously, and Shenmue 3 was only a few years ago. So they're still working on things in there. Not a whole lot in the after story. It's kind of still a recent game in a recent series, but that's how we got here. We had already covered the early career of Yu Suzuki, and now we've learned about the majority of the rest of his career. So we filled in the gaps today.
Let's go.
And there are a lot of other games in there that we talked about. Grand Theft Auto 3 we just did a couple weeks ago. And in the beginning, we had talked about, some games that we had done other episodes on, like the Olympic episode and Pokemon episode and Counter Strike, all that fun stuff. Of course, if you ever want to check out any of our old episodes, you can do so, first of all, wherever you get your podcasts, Apple Podcast, Spotify, things like that. But our preference is that you check out our website at www.memorycardlane.com. Rob, what else can people do on our website?
Well, you can find a calendar of our upcoming episode topics. You can find a link to our Discord where you can come talk with Dave and I. You can find a link to our Patreon where you can help support us, get access to ad-free and unedited versions of all of our episodes. And you can find links to our social medias where I am on several platforms as Rob_O_Raptor and Dave.
I can be found on various platforms as David is Wrong. Each week, we tell you a story relevant to the current week in gaming history. It can be about a game, it can be about a console, it can be about a person, a technology. I just find some topic relevant to gaming history of the current week and we roll with it. While doing so, we hope to teach you something new about the topic, what it took from the world as its inspiration, or what it gave back to the world in its legacy. Each week, when we sit down to do our research for future topics, we learn things. That's the best part about doing this week in, week out. Every week we learn things. And as we learn new things, I excitedly get to teach them to you. That's my favorite part, finding new things to teach you. So, in celebration of this learning, teaching cycle, we like to talk about what we've taken away each week. So, Rob, what did you learn today?
Well, I learned all about the game and the series that I knew nothing about. But I think my favorite was the bugs. It's a lot of unresolved bugs, and obviously some were not there, but some were not fixed, rather. But it's still insane to go from 10,000 to having a playable game. And I really like that one about the convenience store. I mean, such a simple fix with the widening of the door, but it's just kind of crazy to think that you have this whole game where they go to a coffee shop and then, or a convenience store, and then they leave, and they couldn't. And they all just kind of said, oh, I don't know where to go. what do I do? And just stuck there. That's weird. It's kind of cool how programming is.
It's kind of cool that the solution was just make the door wider so they don't get stuck. Because
Yeah.
it's the lesser of all the evils, right? Because from the programming standpoint, if you weren't that smart about it, you'd have to program everyone to walk in at different times. So you'd have to program everyone's routine to change, which is inevitably a lot of programming. But by just widening the door so they don't get stuck, you don't have to do anything but widen the door. Like, it's a genius. It's such a simple solution that saved them so much time. It's fantastic.
Right.
So, yeah.
So that's it for me. What about yourself?
I really enjoyed learning about the evolution of the game from, the old man in the peach tree to Guppy, to Virtual Fighter RPG. I didn't know this was originally a Virtual Fighter tie-in, but it makes sense now in the context of everything. To Shenmue. This is a gap for me. I don't have a lot of experience with this series. I never got into this series. I never had a Dreamcast, so that's not true. I never had a Dreamcast back in the 90s. I owned one as an adult, but I never had Shenmue on it. And so I've never really had an opportunity to play these. I've thought about it. I've been told that I would like this game because I like mundane stuff like this. I like detailed immersive worlds. So I've been told this would appeal to me, but I've never gotten around to it.
Well, you should do the thing, Dave.
We should do the thing and play it. That's for sure. All right, Rob. Well, before we take it out of here and I tease next week's episode, is there anything you'd like to add to this topic today?
Well, as always, I got to take a quick moment to say thank you so much to everyone for listening. It means the world to us, and we hope you enjoy getting to listen day week in, week out with us. So keep on at it.
Keep on at it. All right, ladies and gentlemen, that wraps up our deep dive into the world of Shenmue. From its groundbreaking approach to open world design to its influence on storytelling and player immersion, Shenmue changed the way we think about video games as an art form. Whether you spend hours practicing martial arts, chatting with NPCs, or just getting lost in Yokosuka, Shenmue remains a unique experience that's remembered fondly by its fans to this day. Next week, though, we're leaving the streets of Yokosuka behind and we're heading to the launch of the original Microsoft Xbox. We'll explore how Microsoft entered the console race, the challenges they face, and how they forever changed the gaming landscape. From Halo to Xbox Live, we'll dive into some of the innovations that made Xbox a game changer. So join us next week as we uncover the history of the original Xbox and take another trip down memory card lane. Do the thing.
Skibidum bop 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 moo.